looking for two things. One is in the top 10, and two is, does it have a strong healthcare background? But like I said, healthcare companies are looking for top talent. And so as long as you're in a highly ranked program, they're going to come looking for you. And MBAs let you do that. I mean, the breadth of courses and classes and certifications you have is crazy, right? From, like, you can do data analytics, you can do blockchain, there was AI certifications.
How can you share your experience about the interview?
Sure. The interview, especially for MBAs, tends to be quite relaxed. It's not as I don't think it was as stressful as any of the hundreds of job interviews I've done over the last couple of years. I felt like all the interviews I did were very conversational. They were just trying to see whether they can have a conversation with me about different subjects. And so I remember one conversation was about a book I was reading. So I was reading a book called Sapiens by Yuval Harari at that point, and all my interviewer wanted to talk about was evolution. And so that was one. There was another one that I did. Another interview was purely about, like, drug pricing. A third one was about healthcare in India. So I think they're looking more as to whether the person's going to be a good fit for that particular school. They want to be able to make sure that you're going to be, it tends to be a bit of a subjective metric, but are you going to be fit in that particular school's culture? So, can you have a conversation? Are you able to talk about different topics, or are you stuck in one particular place? And I mean, think about it from as a doctor, and you'll see this with a lot of your, friends and who work in medicine. You tend to be living in that one bubble, and you forget about the world that exists outside the hospital. There's a lot of doctors who take the effort to read and, go out and do things outside of the patient care world. But the majority of people don't. And so they're trying to see whether, you can fit in with the broader community or not. Are you going to be able to mix with other people? Open your mind up. Are you open-minded for, to have different experiences? So they tend to look for people who can have a conversation with them and who can fit in, versus interviews for jobs tend to be, what are your successes? What are your failures? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? It's a lot more, it's very structured. So they do have some standard questions that they ask during an interview, even during your MBA. And I mean, you can do a quick search of MBA questions and you'll find a full laundry list to help you prepare. But it tends to be more conversational rather than rigid structure that you have in job interviews. So I had a very relaxed, I mean, I was stressed, don't get me wrong, because I was desperate to get into a top 10 MBA. But I think in general, the vibe was very relaxed in all of my interviews.
All right, sir. So as you already mentioned that when you were looking to apply for MBA, you were looking for top 10 or 15 MBA college. So
Yeah.
this was one of the reasons that you opt for HAAS School of Business. Apart from
Mhm.
this, is there any other thing that you opt for this college?
So when I was looking in 2018, I was looking for two things. One is in the top 10, and two is, does it have a strong healthcare background? So if the school has a strong healthcare program, it made sense because, one, healthcare companies are going to come to the school to hire people, which is, at the end of the day, I want to get a job that pays me well. And so that's the reason why I do an MBA. There's obviously, you have fun and you make friends and, you open your mind to the world, but, the goal is get a good job at the end of your MBA and get a job that you want. And so, one, making sure that, so there's a couple of things I looked at. One was top 10, which is number one. Number two is, if they have a strong healthcare program and people hire from there. So the easy way to get that is, every school has an employment report that you can find on their website. And so when you look through the employment report, it gives you, this percentage went to investment banking, this percentage went to consulting, this percentage went to tech, this percentage went to healthcare. And so in some schools, it'll be, less than 5% or less than 2% went to healthcare. And some schools, it's 10% went to healthcare. And so the higher the people that went to healthcare, the higher the chance that I'm going to get a job in healthcare when I finish. And two is, they're going to probably have more people there with a healthcare background, which is obviously going to make it a better program for me, because there's lots of doctors who want to do an MBA to get completely out of healthcare and do something entirely different. I absolutely love healthcare and I never want to get out of it. And so it really depends on what your goal was. So healthcare was really important for me, and that was number two. And then number three was my honestly the last thing I looked for, which was academic, which was sorry, the location. Um, and so location was important for me because I mean I grew up in Bombay. It's hot, it's humid, it's on, next to the sea. Moving from there to like Minnesota is going to be a really hard switch because that's a very, very cold winter. Number one. And two is I grew up in a big city. I've only lived in Bombay and Bangalore, my entire life. We studied and lived in those cities. That's why I didn't want to move to a smaller city. I wanted to live in a big city. And so that was the third part of my process. Typically, the way it works is if you go to school in California, or if you go to school in London, there's a higher chance that companies in that state or that city are going to come and recruit from there, right? So if if I go to a big hub, there's a much higher chance that I'm going to have opportunities versus if I go to a smaller town or a smaller hub. And so big cities were again another very big part of it. So it was almost like a filtering process. And then there's a couple of schools that dropped out at the bottom of that funnel, and those are the schools that I applied to. Again, this is extremely subjective. This is by in no way a process that everyone's criteria. Some people say I want Harvard and I want nothing else, or I want Stanford and I want nothing else. In which case, brilliant, go for it. Some people say I want to found a startup at the end of my MBA. In which case, being in California might make the most sense. Some people want to go banking, and so Wharton or Columbia in New York makes the most sense. So it really depends on what your goal is and where you want to go. But again, it goes back to what I said. It's useful to know what you like doing to be able to make that decision. If I have never worked in anywhere outside a hospital, I'm going to have no clue about these things. And so that experience before applying for an MBA makes such a huge difference for you to be able to filter what you want to do. Otherwise, you're going to come into an MBA and it's like drinking water from a fire hose. There are so many options and so many things going on. You're going to be completely scatterbrained. And it just makes life and decision making a lot harder. So you're going to try, you want to try and make it slightly easier for yourself after making the move, or starting an MBA program. And I think that was part of my decision making process.
All right. So thank you so much for this wonderful insight. Also, I would like to ask if you can mention any other different B school apart from the one you studied, which is good for the healthcare companies.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, healthcare has become a really, really big industry. And so you're going to have people recruiting for healthcare companies recruiting in all of the big schools. Everyone in the US is fighting for top talent, not just the US, in London, in India, in Singapore, everywhere else. They're recruiting for top, they want top talent, every industry, whether you're in tech, you're at Google, you're at Amazon, Pfizer, doesn't matter where you are. Everyone wants the most talented people. And so typically you're going to try and go to the best schools to get the best talent. So earlier there used to be schools that were more healthcare focused. I think that's changed quite a bit now. I feel like healthcare has become such a massive industry, especially post pandemic, that you have, all of the big schools now have dedicated healthcare programs, you have dedicated healthcare certifications. And so you can go to any big school pretty much across the world and they're going to have good healthcare programs. So, off the top of my head, Columbia has a really good program. Harvard does, Wharton does. Um, you know, the European schools I'm not as familiar with. From what I've heard, like the London business schools and those especially there tend to be a little more banking focused. I've heard Oxford and Cambridge have very strong healthcare programs if you're looking there. But like I said, healthcare companies are looking for top talent. And so as long as you're in a highly ranked program, they're going to come looking for you. So I wouldn't worry too much about looking for healthcare brands. Try and look for your ad ranking as your North Star when you're choosing.
All right, sir. Sir, can you give us insights about the curriculum at HAAS School of Business?
Yeah, sure. The one thing I'll caveat with, and I know we'll talk about MBA experience, but I went through a COVID MBA, so it's going to be very, very different from someone who's doing an in-person MBA program. And so the first 6 months of my MBA were in person, and then we went completely virtual after that. And so from a curriculum perspective, I can speak to it, but experience-wise, I mean, it's nowhere close to the experience you're gonna have at an in-person MBA. But curriculum-wise, I mean, you typically have like a core curriculum that you follow that every MBA student goes through, and then you add on things on top of that. And so your core subjects are going to be things like communication, finance, macro and microeconomics, negotiation, what else? Then there's, to a certain extent, like financial modeling and things like that. So just basic skills that you typically expect someone to know in business. And then that's typically core for every MBA program. And then after that, you build on top of it. And so you have electives that let you explore different areas. And so some people wanted to do climate change and climate tech. Some people wanted to do more coding specific, product management for tech companies. Mine was more pharma, biotech, and commercialization, pricing, and things like that. Some people want to do venture capital and investing. So it really depends on what which areas you're trying to get into. And so I was very specific that I wanted to do as much healthcare business stuff that I possibly could, and then sprinkle some of the other things in. Some people just go in there and they just want to try different things and see what clicks. And MBAs let you do that. I mean, the breadth of courses and classes and certifications you have is crazy, right? From like, you can do data analytics, you can do blockchain, there was AI certifications, there was so many things that you could choose, and every school has different options, to be honest. But your core basics are always going to be the same. The one question I get from every doctor who's trying to transition is, oh, I haven't done maths in 8 years, so I'm not going to be able to do that. Honestly, I hadn't done math either. And then, you have to get through GMAT and GRE. And so you don't have a choice but to learn math again. And honestly, that's part of the process. You can't live under a rock and avoid math your entire life just because you got an MBBS. I mean, you have to learn new skills and you have to be okay with, pushing yourself. And so I don't think it was such a big deal. There's lots of courses on Coursera and EDX and things like that if you want to get more practice, even before you go into your MBA. And so take advantage of those things. They're all free. They're all online. Use the internet as much as you possibly can, to build on those skills that maybe MBBS didn't teach you. But it's not at a level where it's beyond you, to be honest. I don't think the difficulty level was so crazy that I needed 2 years of banking experience to learn it. It was meant for people from different walks of life to be able to come in, learn the basics, and then decide whether they want to specialize or not in that particular field. So it was basic enough to understand, but not that basic that it was a useless skill, if you know what I mean. It was a good balance between the two, and most schools are like that. And so, be open to going back to maths and being, open to learning those new skills, because if you are looking to transition outside of clinical medicine, that's going to be a very important character trait that you have to have.
All right, sir. So what was your course duration?
So mine was slightly different. It was a 2.5 year course. So I started in August and then graduated in December. But typically they tend to be 2 year programs or even 1 year programs.
All right, sir. So what are the skills that were focused during the course?
I don't think there were specific skills, to be honest. I mean, like I said, there's a core set of courses that you do that every business student does, and then it depends on what you want to learn after that. So it's very different from an Indian curriculum where you have to study these 5 subjects and these 5 books or these 10 books. It's a completely different approach. This is, you have to study 2 books because that's the basics. And then after that, study whatever you want. As long as you make up the certain number of credits, study whatever you want. So it tends to be you have a lot more power to do what you want to do. So it depends on, what industry you want to be in, which areas you're interested in. So a lot of it comes down to what your interests are. And again, I go back to what I said earlier. If you haven't worked outside a hospital, you don't know what your interests are yet. because you have never seen anything in the world outside of a hospital and patient care. You might have read newsletters and things like that, but it's really, really important to get a couple of years of work experience to be able to choose what you want to do. Whether that's course wise from a curriculum perspective or whether that's job wise from a companies you want to apply to. I think that's really, really important. And I say that we're talking about an MBA now, but that's as true of an MPH or a master's in health informatics. So there's hundreds and hundreds of degrees open in the healthcare space that doctors are looking at right now. And it's extremely important to get some work experience before that, because you can go into these programs and they're incredible. You will learn a lot, but you're going to come out of those end of those 2 years and you might not be that much further ahead in understanding what you want to do, just because you're not targeted. You're all over the place. And I think so I worked for 4 years before my MBA. You don't necessarily need to do four. Some people do six, some people do two. You can, every person is different. But it should be no less than, in my opinion, 2 years before you start a program to really make the most of a program. Otherwise, you're going to go into an MBA class, and a big part of your MBA is your network and your friends that you make there, and your takes and about climate and all of these different topics, yeah, and healthcare as well. But if you haven't experienced the outside world and you haven't worked in the broader world outside of that bubble in the hospital, you're not going to be able to engage with these people. You're not going to be able to have insightful conversations, just because of how medicine is structured and how the hospital is such a bubble that they keep you inside and they don't let you get out. And that's not the doctor's fault. That's not, that's just how the medical system is. But if you do choose to get out, like, you have to break away from that. It served you well while you worked there, but if you want to break away from that, see the outside world, take those risks, go get a job outside, do something else, and that's when you're really going to make the most of an MBA or any other master's program that you want to go after. MPHs especially. A lot of people go into MPH programs instead of MBAs, especially in the US. That's become very, very popular now. But they end up after an MPH struggling to figure out what they want to do, just because they've never experienced life in a pharma company or life in a medical device company or a startup or a digital health company. So you want to be able to get that experience before you come out, just better to know whether you even like it or not, without being stuck there.
All right, so that was very wonderful insights. Sir, also I would like to put some light on the tuition fees. So can you discuss about the tuition fees and